Well, fellas, that was another year, and 2020 is behind us now. I know for a lot of people that might have been not a great year, but if there is one saving grace is that we had a lot of games to go through, and some really great ones that came out this year. But right now, it's the middle of February, and it's 2021, as is usual for this type of channel, but I gotta say, fellas, just hold on a sec, and let me grab some booze. Let's rein in the new year, fellas, even though it's February. Cheers, pros salud. And with that, let's head on and we'll celebrate the games that made 2020 great. Or at least, you know, better than most.
Before we get into the top 10 proper, I would like to talk about a few games that didn't quite make it onto my list, but I'm sure I probably had great fun playing through them. Starting off, I would like to give quite an honorable mention to Murder House or Moida House by Puppet Combo. Another wonderful addition to the spooky collection of 80s exploitation-like lo-fi stalker horror games that Puppet Combo is so great at making. This time around, you play as Emma, a reporter breaking into the house of a prolific Easter killer, aka the Easter Bunny. No relation to that rap rat, or the Santa Bunny, or the rap Santa Bunny rap. And allegedly, the killer got executed for his killing spree against children, but ooh, think again. Soon after the revelation that he ain't dead, you'll be stalked by the goddamn Easter Bunny in a disgustingly decrepit, rundown house that you have seen in many a horror film. New additions that I really enjoyed were providing voice actors for the characters, especially Emma, which brought a bit more personality to the protagonist and made me feel for her in a dire situation. Another thing I liked, even though it's totally a gimmick, is that every time you die with a wonderfully gory cutscene, the game closes the application, having you reload it back up and load up an old save. But don't worry, it only takes like a couple of seconds to get back to where you were.
Sadly, Moida House doesn't make it onto the full top 10 because it didn't quite meet my criteria. I usually like to go and complete my games in full before I give it a spot on my list, but I'm going to put it down in the description below, and there you go. So if you want to get it, go to their itch.io page, give them your money because they deserve it.
There's definitely no denying that if you know me personally, you know that I love me some damn Halo, and going through the PC release of the Master Chief Collection was a wonderful trip back in time to a simpler era where you would hop on your Xbox 360 after school and go straight into custom games of Halo 3 and having a grand old time. The release is, of course, without its own issues, and after a decade of not being on PC, it's kind of blatantly obvious that these games were made for the console audience, with a variety of choices that if they were released on PC, they would be considered questionable. But even with those issues in place, the game was an immense amount of joy to play through again, and it was nice to show the game to some goons who have never gone through them before, and have them growing to love the series as much as I do. And man, as a reviewer, that is honestly what I freaking live for. My favorite comments in my videos are the people that discover cool new games to play through, and even though I only have like 113 subs, these moments where people get to try new things, it always makes my damn day.
Main reason the Master Chief Keith collection is not going to be on this list is because technically, for PC, that game came out last year, last year in 2019. And on a more technical basis, these are all games from like 10 years ago. So I'm not saying that they're bad because they're great, but they don't quite meet the criteria on this list. So without further ado, let's hop into the actual top 10 with our number 10 spot.
The other has come for the chosen one. And soon the veil will break. Suffering's coming will rupture reality.
Welcome to our reality.
I can give you my daughters, birthed from my soul. You will need them to fight. The rest I leave to you.
Hey! First on our list is Othercide by the Lightbulb crew, an especially wonderful and talented dev team from both France and Sweden.
Immediately from the get-go, Othercide is a different kind of turn-based tactics game. While other games in the genre like XCOM or even the incredibly much more better Warhammer 40,000 Mechanicus have premises that are pretty straightforward to get to, Othercide on the other hand gives us a few questions to start off with. In essence, and bear with me here folks, you play the role of daughters fighting the metaphysical manifestations of the suffering provided by a plague in a nondescript city that the game takes place in. Though really you fight in some sort of weird realm called the Veil or something like that. Truthfully, I'm not gonna lie, the lore for this game is a bit obtuse, so I don't quite remember it. But what I do remember is that Othercide is a game that is just dripping with wonderful dread, since the Lightbulb crew wanted to go for more of a horror game and not just aesthetics, but also with its mechanics. Take for example healing. In most other games you would just have a skill that consumes a resource or some sort of action point to heal up a friendly unit. And Othercide on the other hand takes that idea and makes you feel so wonderfully hopeless. See, in Othercide you can't just heal up your daughters. In order to restore the health for one, you'll have to sacrifice a daughter of lesser or equal value. So you don't just consume valuable action points in the middle of combat, but you also lose a unit on top of that. And that's not the only thing you're going to learn to sacrifice. Some of the most powerful abilities in the game require the respective unit to sacrifice a bit of health in order to cast, and that's on top of spending points. Now I keep mentioning action point this and action point that because even those have their own unique mechanics attached to it. See, the order of that the engagements happen correlate to how many action points you use in a given turn. Use up more points to do a more powerful attack and you'll pay for it by being at the end of the turn order. Use your points wisely and you'll see yourself using your daughters more often and perhaps more resourcefully. This allows Othercide's combat to feel more like a pleasing puzzle, having to find ways to use your daughters to the best of your abilities against the relentless foes that you'll have to deal with.
You better not get too used to your daughters in this game, because throughout the game they're going to be spent like the Reaper's coin in the endless conflict of war. But it really kind of brings out the doom and gloom of this setting. And speaking of the setting and the aesthetics, let's take a look at the sound and the wonderful visual design Othercide gives us.
Immediately you'll be sucked into the gloomy, grimy, black and white visuals that Othercide has put on offer. But even with the 3-color combo of white, black and red, the game does some neat things with it. For instance, while the enemies and your daughters are both composed of white, the suffering has a very diseased look to all the units that make them look like they're in internal agony. Only for your daughters that are clad in white that makes them look pure and divine to release the suffering from, well, you know, their suffering. Red obviously comes in for moments of extreme viscera and violence that juxtaposes with the wonderfully pure daughters that you have, destroying all the hopes that you had of watching serenity and joy make it to the end of the battle. And what's great about the crushingly difficult gameplay is that I said before, over time you go from the shocked and appalled person at what your daughters have to go through, and eventually you get so destroyed over time that you readily and cruelly spend your daughters' lives like money.
Now, before we finally finish Othercide, we gotta talk about its soundtrack. And first glances, you go like, damn, did I teleport myself into a middle of a mid-2000s Hot Topic? And the thing is that I kind of like it.
Alt rock, aka butt rock, is a very interesting genre of music. Most of the time it's so hammy and dour that it usually ends up becoming a goofy meme, like any of Linkin Park's songs from Hybrid Theory or Bring Me to Life by Evanescence. But eventually, while playing through the Othercide, you become so numb to the butt rock that in the end it doesn't even matter, and you'll happily listen to this wonderful schlock as you're blasting away through the suffering, getting to the end of the relentless waves looking for XP until you find it there and you lead it back home. I guess you could say that you're calling your daughter's name and saving them from the dark. I cannot do this anymore. Okay, I had enough of these dumbass references.
But in all seriousness, fellas, Othercide is a really neat and fascinating take on the tactics genre that really tries to put a horror spin into it, and I really did end up enjoying it. So it sits wonderfully and nicely at the number 10 spot. If you want to listen to the soundtrack, I'm going to have it down in the description.
Put an end to suffering.
on your knees before me, so I may absolve you of your sins.
I got you.
Who are you? What are you doing?
Name's Carlos, and I'm Sadie. I'm with the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service, UBCS for short.
This city is completely cut off, isolated. We need help. My men cannot do this alone.
The town's crawling with those freaks.
Ah, yes, the Resident Evil 3 remake. Now, of course, this game isn't without its controversy, but we'll get that a little bit beyond there. Even then, with its controversy, it's still quite a lot of fun to go through.
First, fellas, we're just going to establish a little bit of context, as is usual on this channel, and I'm going to say that I didn't play the game right at launch, and in doing so, I got the game for a much cheaper price than the original $80 Canadian and $60 American. At this cheaper price is how I based my enjoyment of the game and how I'm going to describe it from here on out, but do know that if I had to pay the full price for Resi 3, I would probably be quite disappointed. Now, for those that aren't aware, Resident Evil 3 is the sequel to last year's Resident Evil 2 and a full remake of the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis for the PlayStation 1 in the good old year of 1999. In Resi 3, you play Jill Valentine, a member of Raccoon City's STARS, aka Special Tactics and Rescue Service, who just recently got back into action after the events of the first Resident Evil in investigating what in the world is happening in the Spencer Mansion outside of Raccoon City. While sounding a bit complicated, Resi 3 takes place before, during, and after the events of Resident Evil 2, leading up to the final moments of Raccoon City itself. So you'll get references to the events happening with Leon Kennedy and Claire Redfield from the second game, but you won't meet them.
And in the same sense of the original Resident Evil 2 remake, it is such a wonderful and grand reimagining of a game that originally came out on the PlayStation 1.
Fellas, I won't lie, while I still immensely enjoy playing through the PS1 games from time to time, there really is something to be said from starting off with the Jill sandwich days and making it all the way to the present, where the game is entirely recreated with modern visuals, sound, and of course, voice acting. If I would have made a review for Resident Evil 2, I would have said that one of my favorite aspects of the visual upgrade is that the game still takes place within 1998, so it goes to great lengths to make the world and the aesthetic still look like it was from 22 years ago, but make some relatively grounded sci-fi stuff that wouldn't be too out of place in universe. Not just the visuals are updated, but the looks of the characters have been updated as well, and I gotta say that Carlos and Jill, woo, they're looking mighty fine. Though I will still miss the old, let's say, clothing design for Jill. Though really the only redesign that I'm really not a big fan of is the new design for Nemesis, where he has these big goofy looking teeth and what seems to be a melted skin over his bald head that just doesn't do it as well for me. The original Nemesis design seemed more grotesque and less human-like that for me made Nemesis more monstrous, like a bioweapon that you don't want to mess with, while the new one on the other hand just doesn't have that threat to his looks. Gameplay on the other hand is completely different.
Now, of course, Resident Evil 3 doesn't just up the visuals, it also changes the gameplay a bit to make it more to a modern standard, something that you would play more akin to today.
Gone are the old tank controls of yesteryear, and to replace it we have a nice over-the-shoulder perspective and a full range of motion to give Jill and Carlos to this new game. Of course, instead of fixed camera angles, the game gets us up close and personal with the gritty action that is occurring on screen, so every exploding head or dismembered limb brings out a fabulous explosion of gore. But, of course, the more that things change, the more they stay the same, and just like in 1999, you'll be making sure to keep your ammunition topped up, combining different plants to make rudimentary medicines, and of course, combining way too much gunpowder with way too much other gunpowder to make like the most pathetic amount of measly 9mm rounds. The Resi 3 remake also takes the same sort of more action-oriented approach to the survival horror elements from the original that differentiated from the original Resident Evil 1 and 2, but just because you think you got a lot of supplies don't mean that in the right situation it can all be depleted in an instant. Overall, it creates for a more fast-paced game with the stakes constantly being raised from encounter to encounter that eventually reaches the apotheosis of the end of the game.
So, it does seem like I have endless praise for Resident Evil 3 apart from a few minor things, but the fact of the matter is that there are some kind of issues that you should take into account before buying it, especially at full price, and we're going to go into that.
See, fellas, where it stands, I don't believe that the game is worth the original $60 or $80, and the reason for that is that the game, in comparison to its predecessor released just barely a year ago, is criminally short. Usually it takes me about, 15 to 20 hours if I really take my time reading through all the shish and with these survival horror games, with the follow-up playthrough taking about half that to blast through the game. Resi 3 Remake, on the other hand, only lasted me barely 9 hours on my first playthrough, and consecutive runs took me about 4 to 5 to go right through them. Now, that doesn't mean that the game is awful. Far from it, fellas. It just means that you have to take into consideration how short the game is compared to other survival horror games, and factor that into the price. At around $20 to $25, which is what I got it at, I think it's a very fair price to the fun ride that you have ahead of you.
And that's why, fellas, Resident Evil 3 Remake's a little bit higher up on this list, because it's still really fun and really good to enjoy, but just make sure you buy it at a lower price point. But beyond that, fellas, let's take a look at the game at our number 8 spot.
No chance of fighting our way out of the city. Why is she here? She's unreliable.
It's me he's after. I'll buy you some time.
Hey, wait! Wait, Jill!
Boy, Prodeus finally came out this year, and I gotta say, it was incredibly worth the wait for this boomer shooter.
Prodeus is another wonderful title in the not-so-new but somehow pleasantly resurging boomer shooter genre that seems to have taken the industry by storm. Enough so to have its own event in Realms Deep, which was hosted by, of course, good old 3D Realms. Quick aside, in that pretty much anything that was shown off at Realms Deep is something that I am incredibly looking forward to, and if you enjoy old-ass boomer shooters like Quake, Doom, Blood, or Dick Nickem, I would take a gander at those games because they all look pretty badass. Prodeus was one of these games shown at the event because finally it's releasing this year, and apart from the typical spirited charm of the build engine games, it has some really cool stuff going for it. To start off, let's talk about the immediately obvious quality of this game being the absolute superb sprite work that has gone into Prodeus. It's sort of odd to describe, but if we lived in some sort of nightmare dimension that now when you think about it, isn't really a nightmare dimension, it seems more like paradise, where the only engine was the build engine, and we had to try and squeeze as much visual fidelity out of it, then goddamn, Prodeus is the game that gets that done. All the guns look and sound fantastic, with a variety of different ammunition types changing not just how you use the weapons, but how you strategize, how you go about the different maps in the game. To put it simply, it's not just the map and the enemies that will change, but what kind of ammo you'll frequently find in the map that will change as well. Sometimes you have more shell ammo for stuff like the shotgun or the assault rifle, and other times you'll find chaos ammo to be more abundant for stuff like the arc rifle. It's little additions like these that really put a different spin to the gameplay loop in what I found to be a fun and rewarding way. You take considerations such as positioning and speed a lot more when you're limited in the types of weapons that you can reliably use at a given moment.
Of course, on this channel, it's not just the story and the gameplay that we talk about, or in this case, the incredible lack of story, but we also got to talk about the soundtrack. And oh boy, we got another great one by the great Andrew Hulshult.
Honestly, at this point, what more can be said about how amazing Andrew Hulshult is in practically every damn game that he composes? From Dust that we've had on this list a few years back, to New Bloods and Medieval, to finally even going on to do the soundtrack for Doom Eternal's The Ancient Gods Part 1. It's all fantastic. Yet Hulshult still finds a way to make each individual soundtrack great and unique in its own right. And from what we've heard him do before, it should be a no-brainer that we're going to get a nice heavy industrial metal soundtrack that's fitting for Prodeus. Now the other part I really love is that even within this righteous soundtrack, we get different styles that remind me of completely different franchises, but it fits so well with the hellish aesthetic. Take the track Transcendence for instance. It's still got a wonderful electronic elements typically found in industrial metal, and then you add on some more vocal choir elements and a pipe organ, and you create a sound that's so different from what we heard in these shooters. Honestly, hearing this track now, it reminds me of another franchise, but I can't quite put my damn finger on it. Let's take a listen to this, fellas, and let's try to figure it out.
Gods shall witness us this day.
And that's not even the only other franchise that I would love to hear a soundtrack from Hulshult. Now we gotta go into a track called Synthi-Tech. Synthi-Tech, on the other hand, exchanges the choir and the organ for the synthesizer and creates a completely different sound from Transcendence. This time around, the electronic influence of the Progenitor soundtracks comes to the fore end, and I feel like it's something that would not be out of place in goddamn Mass Effect. If you would have told me that I would have wanted to hear Andrew Hulshult's take on a Warhammer 40,000 soundtrack in a Mass Effect 1, I probably would have believed you anyways, but this just solidifies it.
But we haven't gotten into one of the most interesting parts of Prodeus's design, and that's the fact that the developers have given the players the exact same tools that they use to create new and cool and fascinating custom maps.
See, Prodeus gives the community the exact same tools that the developers use to create a whole variety of cool and interesting maps for us to enjoy. Pair that with that soon-to-be implemented Steam Workshop integration, and you can easily and quickly download and play a variety of badass new maps. Some of my favorites are Truck Surfer, where you're basically fighting your way on a highway from the big rig to big rig, almost like it's the Matrix Reloaded. Another great map is Cold Storage, that's more a traditional boomer shooter FPS map that has you trapped in a freezing station filled with wonderful piles of blood and gore that are the Hellspawn.
Overall, Prodeus is looking like another fine addition into the modern boomer shooter collection. But if you want some more, fellas, keep on watching because we're gonna have some more down on this list.
For us. He invaded every part of our world. So, we did the only thing we could. We set the world on fire. Now my war begins. Against the monster that created these monsters.
Summon the beast! Crush them!
And it's time to go hunting.
That bridge is our way in, and they can't flank us. Don't go gentle. Bring it, shitheads.
Close one!
Enemy reinforcements.
Not gonna lie, fellas, 2020's been kind of an odd year with some really crap surprises, but one surprise on this list that caught me completely off guard and for the better is a Gears of War game. But not just any kind of Gears of War game, a tactics Gears of War game. What? But you know what? It's really good.
Alrighty fellas, it's story time, and so let's go ahead and preface this whole section with how I even came about to knowing about Gears Tactics in the first place. So last year around the time that the Outer Worlds came out, aka that RPG from Obsidian that ended up feeling as impactful as a wet fart, I got on board with Xbox Game Pass because if I wanted to play this game on PC, it was either on Xbox Game Pass on launch or it was on Epic's Game Store. I thought it was neat at first, and I was happy that for the price of $2 I could play the Outer Worlds and then summarily throw it in the trash like it deserves, but I never really understood how good of a deal it could eventually become. Turns out that for proprietary Microsoft games like Gears Tactics or eventually Halo 6, they released day one on Game Pass, and so I had a fresh what would have been $60 American or $80 Canadian game on launch for the price of your average fast food meal. Looking ahead to the future, it seems that Microsoft is grabbing more and more studios, and that for a whole lot of us, this deal will only get better and better with the release of more AAA games on launch.
Now, I'm not paid to show Game Pass. I'm just saying, fellas, but let's get real here. I kind of wish I did, a little bit of that money, but I'm gonna be real with you, fellas. I think it's an exceptionally good deal. Future for video games, yeah, it's kind of rocky with Microsoft buying everything, kind of like Disney, but on a consumer sense, $15 a month for some really good games, especially things like Stalker 2 coming out in the future, and I think that one Warhammer game. But anyways, it's actually a good deal, and if you want to look into it, yeah, you should look into it. I'm not going to put it on the list or in the description below because I'm not that kind of shill. They don't pay me that money.
But anyways fellas, let's take a look at Gears Tactics and how it's not just a refreshing take on the tactics genre, but also a very interesting and fitting choice for Gears of War. Gears of War, for the fellas that are not familiar with it, is a big, dumb, third-person shooter where you play as guys who would not look out of place at a football game. and you get to destroy monsters known as the Locusts, who are a filthy race of disgusting underground dwellers that you proceed to genocide in practically every game. The Locusts are, unfortunately, like gophers or rats of unusual size in that no matter how hard you genocide them, whether it be blowing up their tunnel cities, tunneling down into their tunnel cities to blow up said cities, or flooding the same cities, they never really seem to die off.
Now sadly, I can't go down into a gopher's lair and give him a piece of my mind, but you know what? The dream is still there.
In the mainline games, it is as described a third-person shooter where you and a friend can go into these wonderfully done co-op campaigns and get up and close and personal and blow the ever-living hell out of the locust swarm in disgustingly wonderful graphic detail. So how does this translate into a tactics game? Very damn well, if I do say so myself, and it all comes down to the core to the fact that it keeps everything from the look, the sound, and the presentation of the mainline games just placed into a new perspective. See, Gears Tactics is magic because it looks very similar to the same models that you would find in the main games, followed with the same environments and the same effects that result from using the Lancer chainsaw bayonet to cut down some locust filth. The Coalition, with splash damage, genuinely took the same Unreal 4 build and just transplanted it into a different style of game, while keeping the presentation intact, which ends up making Gears Tactics probably one of the best looking tactics games out there.
So the game looks good, and the kills are pretty gory and disgusting and goopy, but how does the game play? And honestly, it does a few things different than its competitors, almost kind of like Othercide on our list, that makes it very interesting. It gives it a neat kind of spin to it.
Like a lot of other tactics games, you'll head into battle with a squad of gears, which are this universe's common human soldier, and then they have 3 different actions that it can do in a turn, ranging from moving and taking cover, followed by blasting the locust by using firearms or by lobbing grenades, and then finishing it up by going into Overwatch or executing an enemy. Gears Tactics changes things around by having a segmented health bar that changes the state of the unit depending where it's at. For example, once you get an enemy's health bar down to 0, they'll go into a down state. In its down state, they can either get revived by an ally or get brutally executed by the enemy, ranging from the classic curb stomp to beating the death with whatever weapon is on hand. If an ally succeeds in bringing back someone from death, then their health bar is permanently reduced for the rest of the segment, and eventually being down enough, you basically just die. Now on our end, if we execute an enemy, it allows the full squad an additional action point. That means we can shoot someone else and continue the cycle, or do other actions such as repositioning or healing a teammate. I really love it when tactics games gives you these really interesting mechanics regarding action points because it rewards the player for setting up some really cool scenarios that end up paying off in fulfilling ways. Lastly, Gears Tactics takes some, tactics from the main game and things like the concept of emergence holes, where the locust will constantly come out of unless destroyed immediately by lobbing over a grenade. Other than that, fellas, it's pretty much a Gears game in presentation and story, which in comparison to other tactics games, provides a much more concise narrative with some great cutscenes.
Honestly, Gears Tactics was a surprise game that I did not expect to play this year, or ever for that matter, but it turned out to be really great and I really did enjoy it. So if you fellas are out there and you like XCOM or Warhammer 40,000 Mechanicus, go out here and give this game a try. You might actually really like it.
Just like we planned it.
It shines! Hey, you! Patrick needs to do laundry.
Lion squirrel coming through!
Damn! Talk about a blast from the past. But because this year is no good and awful and poopy and dumb, Spongebob makes it onto this list just for putting a big, dumb, wonderful smile on my face.
Battle for Bikini Bottom is actually a faithful remake of a SpongeBob platformer from the PS2 days that at that point was one of the former THQ's many TV and movie license games that now, in the modern era of the return THQ, is ironically enough one of the main big games launching for them in 2020. The game stars our wonderful spongiform protagonist who one day, like any other in Bikini Bottom, is on the unfortunate end of one of Plankton's vile schemes to steal the Krabby Patty formula. This time he creates a robot army to go out and cause havoc, but unfortunately for Plankton, in typical fashion, he loses control of all the machines and they kick him out of the chum bucket. Yeah, fitting.
I don't know why Plankton goes through so much trouble trying to get the Krabby Patty formula, because while I don't have it with me, if you go on to page 176 of the Cooking with Bobbish cookbook, you'll get the Krabby Patty on there, so I don't know why he doesn't just go for that, but whatever.
The game follows a typical collect-a-thon platformer formula where you have to go around several maps around Bikini Bottom and collect golden spatulas to eventually unlock new areas to basically keep doing the same. While it seems like a repetitive gameplay loop, it basically sometimes is, but there's games that you go through just to relax and enjoy. And Battle for Bikini Bottom was one of those games for me this year. You'll play as Spongebob, who uses a variety of bubble-blowing techniques to destroy the robots. Sandy Cheeks, on the other hand, uses a mix of the lasso and karate, which are staples of what a typical Texan squirrel should know, and Patrick uses the most powerful weapon of all, his magnificent girth. The game will have you go through a variety of locales, like Jellyfish Fields, Goo Lagoon, and Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy's Lair, and of course, Rock Bottom, and their really peculiar accents.
Honestly, fellas, that's all I really got to say for the game. Like, it's just so simple. It plays fun, it's goofy and ridiculous, and it puts a smile on my face, so don't really have any more to say about it, sadly.
Battle for Bikini Bottom was matched along with Destroy All Humans remake as THQ Nordic's first big return into the gaming scene, and I really hope it worked out for them, because they were probably one of the better publishers that didn't do particularly anything vile except go out of business and deny us a sequel to Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine. If you're looking for a return to a simpler time that wasn't so full of bullshit, then pick up these two games whenever you can, because I guarantee that THQ could definitely use that cash to slowly rebuild their empire from the ashes.
But with the end of SpongeBob here, this is sadly the last wholesome game on our list, because everything after that is going to be disgusting, bloody, deranged, and insane, aka kinda like me. So let's get on to the next game.
I feel like a new sponge.
Yes, fellas, another boomer shooter on this damn list. And I gotta tell you, fellas, with games like Ultrakill, we're gonna reach a new renaissance in boomer shooters, because damn, this game has some real cool stuff going for it.
Unfortunately for humanity, it seems that we have perished in the new age, since all we need to know is that we're playing the lovable and somehow, on good old Twitter, lootable robot V1, and mankind is dead, blood is fuel, and hell is full. But what's good is that everything you need to know is shown to you within the span of 30 seconds or so, with one of the aspects that I tend to love about these boomer shooters, which is whether or not it has any story elements, it gets straight to the point and right to the bloodshed. Though apart from environmental storytelling, there isn't that much to be said about Ultrakill's narrative, but what I can tell you is that the environments and enemies that you go through are particularly fascinating. You start off in the midst of a goopy demon machine in hell that is reminiscent of an actual meat grinder, with mechanical moving surfaces and discoloration throughout, making you question whether that stain is rust, blood, but probably both. Eventually you'll end up coming out into a more natural environment that, if we're still assuming this is hell, it looks like Limbo out of Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, the realm where good pagans hang out since they can't actually make their way to Purgatorio or heaven.
Unless you're a Wiccan dude, because seriously, you're going down to the sixth circle for that heresy. But that's besides the point, because really we should be talking about Ultrakill's wonderful gameplay.
If I were to describe Ultrakill's concept, I would only need to quote the URL for the game's website, which is aptly known as devilmayquake.com, because truthfully, well, that's just how it plays. And for those that aren't aware, that basically means that you're going to take the fast-paced shooter gameplay from games like Quake or Unreal Tournament, and you pair that with the equally fast-paced, finesse-focused combo gameplay of games like Devil May Cry or Bayonetta. So basically, you're going to be going around blasting these disgusting husks, and on top of being quick and on your toes to just deal with the normal enemies. The game also pairs that with a combo system that rewards you for quickly and more stylishly dispatching your foes. And I gotta say, fellas, that whatever Hakita Dev, the developer for Ultrakill, did was nothing short of cocaine, because the levels are wonderfully short, and you're blasting through them numerous times to get the best score that you can. To get the best scores, you'll do things like using the right weapons, getting headshots, killing those poor bastards in the air, and reflecting shots back at the enemy to create the most havoc. But that don't mean that the game is going to be easy, because even on normal you'll end up dying in around 4 hits from just about anything. But getting health back is as easy as basking yourself in the blood of your enemies.
Now, basking yourself in blood like you're taking a bath is real cool and all. But what about the weapons that Ultrakill provides? And, there's only like 4, but they do some really cool mechanics with them that makes it worthwhile for only having so few.
For instance, each weapon has 2 different fire modes, so starting off with the pistol, it has its regular shots followed up by a charged up shot that you can use to unleash a nice big explosion. But you can replace up that charged up shot for a coin that if you toss it in the air and you actually manage to hit it, you will critically hit anything in its way, whether it be blasting the weak point in a boss fight or have the shot ricochet and hit enemies around corners. The shotgun works similarly in that the first fire mode is basically charging up the shotgun, but instead of a giant super shotgun blast, it changes the speed and trajectory of the blast so it goes into a wider spread at faster the rate. The other fire mode, on the other hand, allows you to load up numerous shells at once, and you can fire them all off at the same time, creating a wall of lead to blast whatever the hell is in front of you. But be sure not to load it with too many shells, or else it will backfire and hurt you as well. Finally, we have the nail gun that almost acts more like a minigun in the type of damage that it does, though this time around the fire modes are described as full auto and maybe even fuller auto, though I would probably call it fart auto because of how ridiculous the effect is when it builds up speed. It's a gun that always puts a big dumb smile on my face because it sounds like it's always audio clipping, and it has the extra muzzle flare just to show how much lead you're throwing out.
But before we finalize ourselves with Ultrakill, let's take a look at its visuals for a sec. Now, for this genre, the visuals aren't quite anything special, but as a whole, I kind of want to talk about this sort of movement.
See, when the new console generation came around, they showed off their new systems and went, "Yo, look how good this looks." My initial reaction is always like, damn, that looks real expensive to develop. Personally, I feel that eventually we're going to reach a point where these games look so good and have so much development time going into the visuals that other aspects of the game are obviously going to falter. Which leads us into this new renaissance of boomer shooters and really any other indie games that is starting to become incredibly refreshing, in the sense of developing games that, while aren't the most graphically intensive, look great by their virtue of the style looking fantastic. A lot of these games try to conjure up imagery of games like Half-Life and Quake or Thief and really anything from the PS1 or the late 90s. And games like that I'm always going to eat up with a big dumb smile and ask for more. And you know what the great part is, fellas, is that these games are effectively a lot cheaper to develop and allows the teams to be small and dedicated, fully putting their passion into the project like we can see with Hakita Dev and New Blood Interactive with all their games. So if the game looks cool to you, you should go out and pick it up because it's a pleasure to run through, and make sure to grab other titles from New Blood like Dusk, Amid Evil, Unfortunate Spacemen, and especially Spacemen since, you know, that game's free to play and it's a whole lot of fun.
But fellas, be sure to be on the lookout for more content coming out for Ultrakill, and of course all the new wonderful games coming out from New Blood, because the whole lineup there is exceptionally wonderful. Finally, a game I actually reviewed this year, so sadly I'm going to be a little bit shorter with it, but that being said, if you want to know more, check out on the corner up there and I'll have my review listed. But sadly, and I'm going to be sorry for this, Maldo, because it's going to be pretty short, but let's get into the horror of Salazar House.
In Horror of Salazar House, you play the role of one Elisa Munoz, who is tasked with getting to the bottom of a spooky mystery in the eponymous Salazar House. After getting some weird dreams that highlight the horrors that Elisa might be getting into once she gets into the house, she heads on and it quickly devolves into a grim, disturbing, yet profoundly sad tale of a family that had to deal with loss, and what better way to deal with loss than dealing with satanic entities. Horror of Salazar House takes a lot of inspiration from Italian giallo films of old, which are in essence messed up murder mysteries that usually deal with insanity, lust, depravity, and at times, devil worship. While not all aspects of giallo cinema make it into the game, Salazar House has some really great influences going for it, and paired with the Virtual Boy-esque aesthetics mixed with the wonderfully rotoscope entities, it makes for a visually and thematically interesting game.
Not just the visuals have neat influences, the soundtrack has a really neat, particularly wonderful influence as well that I'll get into.
While immediately it's obvious that the sound effects and score are using what would have been available within the Atari soundscape, upon closer inspection we get some really interesting influences. Prime of which is Maldonado's influence of the Devil's Trill Sonata by one Giuseppe Tartini, that to really dumb down a rather interesting story, Tartini, a violinist from the 18th century, one day dreamed up an exchange with the devil where he played most exquisitely. So exquisitely, in fact, that Tartini woke up and tried to copy down whatever he heard from memory as best as he could, but to no avail since it was, after all, revealed to him in a dream. The Devil's Trill also reinforces the theme of devil worship and makes pacts with entities we really shouldn't be, but with overwhelming sorrow, sacrifices will be made, and I guess maybe in this case even literally. One, this is as far as I want to talk about it here without repeating myself all over again. If the game so far has your interest piqued, then you should go out and check out that review I did.
Maldo, my man, if you're watching this, I'm sorry that the game is so short on this list, but one, well, I've already reviewed it, but two, the fact that it made it all the way to the number 4 spot means that it is such a great game, and I have that honor of putting the game on that list. But for all the other fellas out there, to pick it up if you can. It's very short, but it's so worth every moment. And it has such wonderful and great influences, and it helps out a guy. So I'm gonna have the itch.io page down in the description, so if you guys want to pick it up, go right ahead. But anyways, now we're gonna get into the top 3 games on this list, and these games are completely different from the last ones. They're really innovative, transcendental, where it makes my brain pop out of my head. But they're just of exceptional quality that they make it up this high. So let's get on to number 3. You're probably wondering to yourself, what the hell is this game? And I gotta say, Hylics 2, it's like Hylics 1, but number 2.
Alrighty fellas, I guess it's time for some context, as is usual on this program. Anyway, Hylics 2 is, well, obviously the sequel to the first Hylics that came out in 2015, developed by one Mason Lindroth on RPG Maker, like some of my other favorite games like Yume Nikki, .flow, and of course, Off. Now, even back then, Hylics gave off a completely unique vibe in the sense that all the characters and creatures to be fought in the game were first created out of clay and then digitized, which gets blasted through a post-processor to give it a distinct grainy sort of look. In the game, you follow our main man, Wayne, and you go through the world, gathering pals and heading towards the moon to defeat Gibby, Lord of the Moon. First game was done in the typical grid-based style that most RPG Maker games come in, where you can only really move in several directions with several additional constraints that RPG Maker has. Not that the engine is particularly flawed, but with the sequel comes new heights and a larger, more ambitious game.
Fellas, I'm not gonna lie, the first Hylics game is probably one of the most visually fascinating RPG Maker games out there. But this game, Hylics 2, right from booting it up, it immediately blows that out of the water.
When Lindroth said that the sequel was going to blow people's minds away with how ambitious it was, well, as far as my reaction goes, I was thoroughly blown away, and you get that even just in the damn title sequence. Like, god damn man, look at that motion! You can clearly get to see the labor of love that went into this game, and the move from RPG Maker to Lindroth's own proprietary engine is definitely a good one. but soon after, the whole world is revealed to be entirely in 3D from an isometric perspective, and like the title screen, it just blows me away. The whole world is wonderfully crafted in the same clay that everything else is crafted in, but in 3D with a fuller range of motion that the world just feels much more alive. The individual characters are still in 2D sprites, but this time there's more frames put in for a more fluid motion, and to show a better range of motion in 8 directions, which now brings us to another addition to the open world elements. Hylics 2 now has some light platforming elements that now, as previously stated, really brings out what originally was a 2D world into a fully realized 3D one. And sure, it's not without its jank, but hell, I think there's more crazy jank out there to deal with, especially from this year. I know I sound like a broken record, but motion really is the name of the game when it comes to Hylics 2, whether it be platforming and blasting off to new heights, admiring the newfound detail in Wayne's walk animation, or just seeing this already interesting world in a new perspective. It all comes down to what a lot of extra details do to the game.
Well, let's leave that behind and let's see what Wayne and gang has been up to since beating Gibby's ass in the first game. And for a game that's as weird as Hylics 2 is, the premise is oddly very simple.
Like a sequel to an early Legend of Zelda or Mario game, the basic premise of Hylics 2 is that even after Gibby's defeat, there are still followers of him that are trying to bring him back together, to wreak even more havoc, and of course, it's up to us, the good old gang, to stop him. The gang is still around and doing their own thing, but before too long, you'll have them all join Wayne in his quest to beat up everyone else that gets in his way. Which brings us to the gang, which is made up of Somsnosa, Pongorma, and of course the hardest to pronounce Dedesmong. In the party, Somsnosa is usually regarded as some sort of support role, while Pongorma is the tank with his knightly ferocity and the control of ambulance skulls. And Dedesmong is another support class that I always had trouble finding use for him, but you know, cool falchion though, can't get enough of that.
Which leads us to Hylics 2's combat, which is a whole nother delight in this damn game.
While I would like to describe Hylics 2 as your typical turn-based RPG when it comes to combat, I really can't, and there's a variety of reasons for it, starting with of course the visuals and the general insanity. If you thought the look of the overworld was whack, well, you got something else coming with the combat and the insane variety of weird and abstract creatures that are going to be fully animated in clay. There would be moments when I would just sit there and I would look at my screen for a solid minute or two, just admiring all the weird and quirky claymation that is unfolding on my screen. Then you cast things and you literally see from the first person perspective of Wayne doing cool ass hand signals to launch attacks at the enemies or deploy tacos to help the squad. And yes, I did indeed say deploy tacos. Probably my favorite one of these hand movements is the one for shocking so much, just whipping your hand around and then boom, they blow up. Ugh, it never gets old.
But I don't want to make it look like that the game is a cakewalk, because honestly fellas, the game is actually really challenging, and that's not just for the bosses or some fights, that's for every single fight.
Hey fellas, you know how like in lots of RPGs you pick up items and almost never use them because most fights you don't even really need them? Then you get to the boss and you're probably like, damn, I could probably use them here, and then you don't even need them there either? Well fellas, Hylics 2 is a game that's gonna kick your ass so bad that you'll need every single one of your items in pretty much every single fight, making even rudimentary fights something you really have to watch out for. Though if you die, it is never the end, because dying is Hylics' leveling mechanic. See, every time you kill an enemy, you end up getting some schmeat, and when you end up dying, you go into the afterlife where you can grind up the schmeat and basically level yourself up. Hylics 2 also implements a new mechanic in the sense of charge, which charges up all your attacks and you can level that up as well, basically by grabbing antennas throughout the maps and leveling them up in the TV island that has its own wonderful distorted soundtrack.
Which finally brings us to the soundtrack of Hylics 2, which like everything else in the game has been incredibly expanded upon from its original.
Lindroth originally did all of the tracks for their first game, and while they weren't bad, You could really tell that the poor guy was working with what he got, but this time around, Lynn Roth brought on Chuck Salamone to help out with the soundtrack, and god damn, does it really improve it. As you've been hearing throughout this portion of the video, you could probably tell that the soundtrack they used to bring out the wonderful world to life is a more proggy, surf rock sort of soundtrack, and it just perfectly encapsulates this goofy little world that is Hylics. The soundtrack for most of the fights is called Them's Fightin' Words, and it's a perfect example. It starts off relatively smooth with that surf rocky vibe, and then it rises to a wonderful crescendo of even more surf rock that never seems to leave my damn head. I usually label whether or not a track is good or not for these type of RPGs by whether I can listen to the track over and over and over again in every single fight and not get sick of it. And when it gets to the point like this track where it's just as great the 30th time as it is the first time, then to me, that's a good a track. Another great clanky track that I love is the track that plays on the TV island that is almost exactly what I think of when I see these wonderful looking little TV fellas. It finds a way to be crunchy and metallic while also finding a way to get those surf rock motifs, and that makes you feel like you're laying on a beach with an antenna poking on your back. Yeah, ouch. But hell, we should probably let the soundtrack speak for itself and go through a wonderful little montage. To wrap up my feelings with Hylics 2, I really think you fellas should give the game a try because there's just something about it that exudes so much life. I find for myself that the claim that Lynn Roth uses creates a special connection between all the different aspects of the game because for all intents and purposes, the creatures, the characters, the villains, and the world of Hylics is made up with that same vitae. And I really just love it.
The game, of course, is on a variety of platforms, fellas, but if I were you, I would recommend going to the itch.io page of the game, so that way every piece of shmoney that you send over all goes to Mason Lindroth's pocket, because he really deserves it for what he did in Hylics 2. But, of course, let's head on to the next game on this list.
humanity's chance to repent.
Against all the evil that hell can conjure, all the wickedness that mankind can produce, we will send unto them only you.
Saving your people will not bring you peace, only make the burden you carry worse.
For millennia we have survived, made others sacrifice in the name of our prosperity. Who are you, a human, to defy our traditions?
You didn't think I was gonna do this list without putting Doom Eternal on it, did you? Well, if you did, shame on you, you piece of filth. Get out of here. But anyways, now that they're gone, let's talk about this demonically great game.
Doom Eternal is the sequel to 2016's soft reboot of Doom that came out of nowhere and completely blew everyone's socks off with how righteous it was. And believe me fellas, if you thought that the original Doom was righteous, then Doom Eternal was gonna make Doom 2016 look like Weenie Hut Juniors by comparison. For the fellas that aren't aware of Doom's monumental presence in the gaming landscape, it started off as a franchise by John Romero, John Carmack, and of course, Sandy Peterson.
Quick shout out to Sandy Peterson because he gets almost like little to no credit for helping out in the development of Doom. And because of the fact that I love his other games on here, it would be criminal not for me to credit him as well.
The game immediately took the world by storm and was immediately casted into the halls of greatness and infamy with a bunch of whiny babies and parents lambasting it for releasing during the Satanic Panic. While I always thought it was rather odd because you are there to rip and tear these demons apart until the deed is done, so I don't really think it's that satanic. But when you mix in the things like the imagery and the heavy metal inspired soundtrack, and at that point you go, oh my god, this thing is so bloody and gory, it might have turned a few heads. 27 years later, and here we are with Doom Eternal that is still being made by id Software, but of course the team has obviously changed completely. But don't let that get ahead of you, because out of all the boomer shooter greatness that came out in 2020, Doom Eternal will be crowned Imperator. And the reason why I'm going to give it such a righteous title is because it's not just better than its peers, and these are some really great peers that it's going to contend with, but because it does what seemed like the impossible and tops the previous iteration in such a way that now it makes it feels like, how the hell can I go back to 2016 after playing Eternal? In every single category, ranging from visuals to the stories, the magnificent soundtrack and the righteous gameplay have been improved in ways that I did not expect, but still absolutely blew me away.
So fellas, let's start out with the wonderfully ridiculous story that Doom Eternal has for us and where the hell it takes us.
Previously in Doom, we stopped the Hell invasion on Mars, but somehow it found a way to kickstart it on Earth, where things are screwed beyond all recognition, and it's up to us as the Doomslayer or Doom Guy to fix all the damn problems. Difference from the previous game is that Eternal now wholeheartedly accepts its ridiculous premise and just goes nuts with it, creating a whole pantheon of worlds and other entities that you of course are going to rip and tear through. I know for a lot of people out there it might seem rather distracting for a Doom game to have so many story elements unloaded to the player and having it all be so obviously tongue-in-cheek, but the caveat is that it's all so wonderfully tongue-in-cheek. You start the game with killing off Daag Nylox, the first corrupted Sentinel priest on Earth of 3 that you need to wipe out in order to stop the Khan Maker and halt the Hell invasion right in its tracks. With the Khan Maker and the Sentinel priests, they've started a whole expanded universe for Doom that includes numerous different planets and civilizations, all vying for their own power and control, all with humanity somehow and unfortunately at the center of it all. Through the game's narrative, it will take you from the deepest pits of hell on Earth to super advanced cultist research facilities to the esteemed halls of elder civilizations that Doom Guy extracts his power from. I also love Doom Guy's reactions to a lot of what's unfolding around him, whether it be his spiteful glare at whatever demon filth is in front of him, or the complete disinterest of events happening around him. It just fits so perfectly as the self-insert for the player that's just nodding along with the goofy story unfolding around him. I know it won't be for everyone, but I really enjoyed the story primarily for how ridiculous it is. It reminds me of a whole season of Metalocalypse of just how stupid it is, but how much it puts a big dumb smile right on my face.
And that's really all I should say about the story, fellas. Like, I ain't gonna lie, it goes places, but let's leave that behind and let's talk about the gameplay for Doom Eternal, and damn, it doesn't disappoint.
The magic of Doom Eternal's gameplay is that they not just completely changed the flow of gameplay from 2016, but the new flow allows you to work it to your heart's desire. The most obvious and what some would say is the most egregious change is the manner in how things like ammo, armor, and health are replenished through combat engagement. See, previously it would just come from whatever goobers you were killing in the environment, but this time around how you get those individual materials comes in 3 different and distinct forms. First off is health, that hasn't really changed with Eternal because to replenish health in the game you execute enemies that are highlighted when you damage them enough, causing a completely goopy and violent flow of gore to call the demon filth. Second change is how armor can be gained, which you can still find it around the map like normal that'll crank it up all the way, but now you have the addition of the flamethrower on your shoulder, and every time you burn enemies it is going to spew a bunch of little armor pieces out as well. And lastly, we have ammunition that can primarily be restored by using the chainsaw, which now, instead of its own reserve of fuel, just constantly recharges over time. Now this is the part that has some controversy because some people are up in arms about the amount of ammo that they allow you to have at the beginning of the game. And while it's not a whole lot, but it does get you attuned to the new style of gameplay, and eventually you'll have all the ammo to your heart's desire.
Now, of course, for the fellas out there that are rolling their eyes because they didn't like Doom Eternal, that's okay. I understand why you didn't like it. But this is, of course, my humble channel, and I'm going to tell you that you're wrong, I'm right, and let's keep on talking.
So far, it's been kinda divisive amongst the fellas that enjoy boomer shooters, but I quite enjoy the new additions that they've added to change the flow of gameplay. To me, the game now seems like this wonderful, intricately gory ballet of using whatever weapons at your disposal, and then popping off the chainsaw or the flamethrower for some easy ammo in the middle of an engagement that sometimes is really quite necessary. I guess we can also talk about the larger, more vertical maps that Eternal has provided, because Doom Guy's new movements reflect the type of engagements that you're going to see out of Hell or the Hellspawn in Earth. Now you'll be jumping up and down the damn maps, blasting demon filth that gets in your way, and while some arenas might be a little bit more smaller, they are always satisfyingly vertical, which goes hand in hand with the rip and tear waltz that you'll be doing the entire game. I know for some that might be too much of a deal because you might be looking for a more orthodox approach to Doom, and I understand, but I have to say, fellas, that this new approach that it gave us is something that I didn't even know I needed in my life.
Let's leave it at that, because now we gotta talk about the final portion of this segment, and you know what that is? That is the exquisite, righteous, demonically good, frighteningly cool soundtrack by Mick Gordon.
As if it's peanut butter and jelly, or ham and cheese, or rip and tear, metal music, and specifically industrial metal music and boomer shooters go hand in hand with each other, and the soundtrack to Doom Eternal is damn near perfect. Like previously in Doom 2016, the soundtrack uses a combination of righteous riffs and sinister synths to get to the blood-pumping, knuckle-crunching beat that just gets you ready to go in and just go medieval on these demon asses. But what I've always said with any of the games that have a great soundtrack is that soundtracks that are downright transcendental are the ones that are not just great, but improve the very gameplay that you're experiencing, and Doom Eternal's soundtrack does that in spades. So to start off, let's take Doom Hunted for instance, which is the track that plays when you go to deal with the aptly named Doom Hunter. It immediately off the gates just starts with those sinister processed riffs and gives you the right tempo to dodge the Doom Hunter's attacks. Another great track is a super gore nest that happens as you're destroying all the demons in front of the, well, super gore nest on Earth. And let me just say that it's wonderful to have Vega tell you straight up to the face that it's called a super gore nest. This track is similar, but it has a lot of those electronic wailing that almost sounds like alarms or klaxons going off. Like everyone has to get out of the area or Doom Guy is gonna give them a nice good old mean evil stare. Then the soundtrack goes in some completely different directions with tracks like Ruins of Necrovol that give Doom some really girthy doom metal riffs. No pun intended, they give hell a sort of industrial horror to it. I mean, you are genuinely in the middle of a giant hellish soul pit that is crunching them into some sort of other energy entirely, which is fitting because this very energy is what has caused all of the damn problems to begin with. But if I had to have a theme song for Doom, I guess for Eternal it would probably be the aptly named track, The Only Thing They Fear Is You. That from the beginning to end mixes a lot of these elements together and just keeps ramping up in intensity right to the very end. But really though, I should let the game speak for itself, so let's hear a nice little montage.
We are not done yet.
So there you have Doom Eternal. It is a righteously wonderful boomer shooter and the one that reigns supreme this year out of all the great ones that come out. But even though it's great, it's still at the second spot. And so without further ado, let's talk about my game of the year, the #1 spot.
Who would seek to stop this.
You are nothing but a usurper, a false idol.
The only thing they fear is you.
2時間ほど前、ジョーから電話があってな。あいつ、榊の組員を弾いちまった。
頭が？
今、ジョーがしょっぴかれるわけにはいかねえ。勤めに行ってもらえねえか、イチ。
何言ってんですか、おやっさん。俺はずっとこんな日を待ってました。おやっさんに恩返しできる日を。 10年や20年そこらの無所暮らし喜んでやらせてもらいます。行くか。
ありがとうございました。
18年後、東上会荒川組春日一番。彼は信じていた。恩人や仲間たちが喜んでくれる姿を。
お待たせしました。春日一番、ただいま帰りました。あれ、どうして。違う、俺は荒川組の組員だったんだ。
18年も留守にしてたんだ。お前のことを忘れちまっても無理はねえだろ。
忘れてるわけねえだろ。おやっさんは俺のこと気遣って手紙もくれたんだ。覚悟できてんのか。その扉を開けたら二度と引き返せねえ。一、お前にその覚悟があんのか。18年、俺はこの扉開けるために18年我慢したんだ。
すまねえな、イチ。死んでくれ。
よ。
どうした？
とりあえずここはどこだ？
偉人町だよ。
偉人町？
偉人町、伊勢崎偉人町。ここは横浜だ。
横浜を支配する三大勢力偉人さん。同胞以外は全て敵。中国マフィアハンピン・リューマン。
やあ、春日君元気？
クモの巣と呼ばれる要塞に住む姿なき組織コミジュル。
我々はメンツで生きてる。
偉人町裏社会の支配者、横浜最大の極道組織清流会。
殺されても仕方がない人だっていうの？そんなわけないよ。
厄介なことになりそうだな。
人生は冒険だ。どうせならどん底からやってみろ。
最後にはてっぺん取ってハッピーエンドよ。ドラクエみてえにさ。
You bastards knew it was going to happen eventually. You knew it. You knew that eventually a Yakuza game would make it to the top of this list. And for 2020, I happily give my game of the year to Yakuza Like a Dragon, or Yakuza 7.
If you've been watching this channel for years, then by now you should know what the Yakuza games are all about. But for the fellas in the back, let's go through this goofy little franchise once again. Yakuza, for the uninitiated, is a long-running series of action-adventure games from Sega that details the exploits of Kiryu Kazuma, a former Yakuza big boy who goes all throughout the games beating the hell out of gangs of goons, whether they be homeless people, Chinese triad, other Yakuza, or, of course, Goro Majima, who seems to be coming out of the walls these days. The games span from the 80s all the way to the modern day, and every game is one part gripping Yakuza crime drama with great heroes and treacherous villains who will kill others for their own gain, set to the backdrop of a bustling and sleepy streets of Kamurocho, which is a district of Tokyo. And second part of the game, as far as we're concerned, is a ridiculous comedy as Kazuma has to deal with everyone's problems, like getting a kid a porno mag or spending way too much time doing a myriad of side activities like going to the pocket racer circuit, or my favorite, doing karaoke with the homies.
But with Yakuza 6, The Song of Life, we're left without Kazuma as a protagonist, and now we ain't got nobody. So who does Yakuza 7 give us? Well, let's talk about Ichiban Kasuga and the premise for Yakuza 7.
In Yakuza, Like a Dragon, or Yakuza 7 from now on, you play the role of Ichiban Kasuga, an orphan like everyone else in Japan allegedly, and you got a real doozy of a mystery to solve. See, the game starts off right before the dawn of 2001 Anno Domini and sets up a lot of the big players that you'll see throughout the game, such as, of course, Ichi, Joe Sawashiro, who's the right-hand man of the Arakawa family, and of course, Masumi Arakawa, the patriarch of the family. After an eventful New Year's Eve hanging out with the son of Masumi and doing some other errands, Ichiban proceeds to take the fall for a murder committed on New Year's Eve and spends the next 18 years in prison, waiting for the day that Arakawa would meet him outside to have him rejoin the world. 18 long years pass and Ichi makes it out of prison only to see that, well, nobody was waiting for him outside of the prison to welcome him back. So he goes on a short journey to figure out what the hell happened these last 18 years. This comes to a head with the end of the effective prologue of the game where Arakawa has seemingly betrayed the Tojo clan and worked with the Kansai-based Omi alliance of Yakuza, at which, when finally reunited, Arakawa shoots Ichiban and leaves him for dead. Ichiban then wakes up in the middle of a homeless camp with a bullet wound to the chest and a new companion who looks a little too close to a personal friend of mine to be coincidence. And funnily enough, this isn't even the first time this happens in this damn game.
Usually at this time, I should be talking to my lawyer about using my friend's likeness in this video game, but Yakuza 7 is so fantastic that I'll just let it slide. And in doing so, let's talk about the dynamics of Ichiban.
The main problems these days with soft or full reboots is that with a lot of these games or series, we've been experiencing them for a long time with a lovable set of characters. And in the case of Yakuza, we've had about 7 mainline games and some spin-offs with Yakuza and friends at the helm. But it's not just the character but also the legend, so to speak, that you have to make equal or better in a reboot. Kazuma is such a big deal that having to deal with Ichiban would probably feel like a chump, and this is how exactly Yakuza 7 goes about getting the audiences to love Ichi. See, you legitimately start from the very bottom of the pit, as in you're actually homeless, and you work your way all the way to the top with the creation of one of the most profitable holding companies in all of Yokohama. Speaking of Yokohama, it also brings us to a new setting that we get to experience alongside with Ichiban. And what's great is that it finds its own way to feel just as homely as Kamurocho or Osaka, which we've been seeing for the better half of a decade and a half now. But to get to the top once more in a new land, we need some new friends that the game provides to us in droves. Whether it be the wonderful hobo mage Namba, or the ex-cop Adachi, or of course our new resident idol in Sayako. These are characters that you will grow to love in the game because instead of just being relegated to side characters, well, they're all part of the main cast now.
Now hold on for a second, fellas. How can there be multiple protagonists in this? It's not like Yakuza 0 where it's constantly switching between a couple of them. No, what is actually happening is that Yakuza completely changes how its gameplay is done.
Whatever you've thought or seen of how combat works in Yakuza, throw that out of the damn window because instead of a street brawler, it's a, turn-based RPG? And you know what? I have no damn shame in saying that it just works. I originally had some reservations because you're going from one system to a completely different one, but bam, here you go. Everyone in the team makes up different classes with different attire and powers that they can use in the heat of battle. Whether it be Ichi's tag team finisher where everyone in the squad gets a little piece of the action, or Zhao's dousing his sword with booze and turning it into a flaming weapon, or of course Namba using ancient lore of yore and channeling his soul to higher hobo magics. But you better believe me that you're going to need those powers because you'll be facing the worst that Yokohama can send your way. Whether it be other homeless people, Yakuza, Triad and Korean Mafia goons, or frickin' chimp in an excavator. What's beautiful with this change is that when you really think about it, it's a change that fits a whole lot more than it really has any right to. See, Yakuza as a whole has always been this sort of ridiculously outlandish perversion of Japanese reality that when paired with the turn-based RPG combat of Yakuza 7 just brings out those aspects right to the front, and while it might not be the most technically ambitious turn-based system, it will put a big dumb smile on my face every single damn time.
Though the beauty with Yakuza is that the more that things change, the more things stay the same. And that is absolutely true for the whole structure of the overall experience of Yakuza 7.
I mean, sure, the combat and the characters are different, but there's still something quintessentially Yakuza about the rest of the game. It's probably that there's still karaoke with friends, or racing some vile villains with kart racing, hosted by Yakuza's own Pocket Circuit Fighter, that we all met back in the 80s. But there's also a whole slew of new mini-games, such as a challenge tower in Osaka that the higher you go, the tougher the enemies get with increasingly better rewards. Though if I had to have a favorite one, it's probably the retro theater that opens up where the goal of the minigame is to not fall asleep while watching some ancient film. We also got the vocational school where Ichiban goes in to get in some extra skills, which helps with the stats in the overworld. I always love it where he beats it and then the staff come in and hold him up like some goofy hero. And finally, there's the property management minigame where it sees Ichiban going from the owner of some lowly bakery to one of the largest holding groups in Yokohama. In it, you take care of the employees and deal with shareholder meetings where Ichiban will use his super move of apologizing profusely to the shareholders.
But I guess that's what we can say for Yakuza 7. All in all, it's a wonderful soft reboot because it does all the things that it requires it to do. Whether that be keeping things the same enough to be quintessentially Yakuza, or changing things enough to make it interesting, Yakuza 7, like a dragon, does all of those things perfectly.
Yakuza 7, like its predecessors, is a game that is completely, unapologetically, and unashamed to be a video game. It has all these wonderful, goofy moments sprinkled throughout the game's stories and subquests, and the combat that just puts a big dumb smile on my face and makes me and my friends laugh our asses off at the 15th millionth summoning of a crawfish to come in and smite our enemies. It also is still a really gripping Japanese crime story of the most brutal betrayals and the most righteous of redemptions from all the cast around you, and you will feel like you have really traveled a whole lot from where we started out at the beginning of the game.
And for both those reasons is why Yakuza 7 was such a wonderful, enjoyable experience, especially going through the year of 2020, which was kinda ass, fellas, I ain't gonna lie. But because of that, and because of bringing such a great smile to my face and being such a wonderful enjoyable experience. Yakuza 7, Like a Dragon, makes it on to be Tomthechosen1's Game of the Year of 2020.
But of course, to cap this baby off, I want to say that one of the defining features I saw this year with the games that I played is that a whole lot of them brought out great evolution to the genres that they inhabit or that the franchises that they come from. Whether it be Yakuza 7 and turning itself into a turn-based RPG, or Gears Tactics turning a gritty and bloody as hell third-person shooter into a pretty damn good tactics game, or it could be the numerous cool boomer shooters that change fundamentally how they play from their predecessors. It's so nice to see the games industry come out and actually have some decent change, because like I said earlier, a lot of these new games that are coming out, they just look expensive. And so when we see new cool games like the ones on this list, it puts a dumb smile on my face. So hopefully from here on out, we're gonna get some great more stuff here in 2021, and from the looks of it, games like Resident Evil 8 or Graven, which is basically kind of like a Hexen reboot that I would love to see, or Gloomwood, which is kind of like Thief, but not, and really should just be its own thing. But goddamn, there's so much cool stuff coming out this year that I hope you guys will join me in that journey of eventually playing through and enjoy, because, well, I might have a new announcement to make, fellas.
And there we go, fellas. We've made it to the end of this wonderful, exquisite list. It's probably going to be feature length from the way that I've been looking at, from the voiceover to probably this thing. It's probably going to be feature length. So if you've made it this far, fellas, thank you so much. I absolutely appreciate it. It's because of people like you that makes it wonderful. And to further add into it, I do have a short announcement to make, that in the sense I might be, maybe, I don't know yet. I'm still trying to figure out. But I might be doing streams this year. Somebody brought it up to me that, hey, I do these game reviews sometimes, and I do all this other crap, but, you know, why don't you stream it? Why don't you show people the games and the footage that you're reviewing? So I thought, you know what? Maybe. So I'm gonna have a straw poll or something like that, or just say it in the comments, whether or not it would be something that would interest you to watch me stream for this year. So put it down there. And for 2021, fellas, it's looking like a great year. There's tons of cool games coming out. There's one game that, although divisive, I'm pretty excited for, so I finally get to try that out. But without further ado, this is Tomthechosen1 using magic tomes like the Call of Cthulhu to figure out ways to get my Italian passport faster. And with that,